The Legend of Zelda is one of the most prestigious video game series in the world. Obviously, having been with us since the mid-1980s, the classic tale of Link taking down Ganon to save Zelda has never really gotten old, thanks to the constant fine-tuning and improving of story mechanics, themes, and settings on Nintendo's behalf. Now, with so many titles in the franchise, there's bound to be a favorite. And in my opinion, that favorite is Wind Waker. So today, I want to break down what makes the game tick and why, in my opinion, it literally is the greatest Zelda game of all time. So where do we start? After the golden age of Zelda games in the 1990s with A Link to the Past, Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask, never mind those pesky 3DO games, Nintendo was looking to create what would be the 10th installment in the series. After Majora's Mask, which was released in the year of 2000, the launch of the Nintendo GameCube was only less than a year later. Of course, Nintendo would be poised to put out a new game in the Zelda series. It's as likely as the sky being blue at this point, unless you live in the UK. But the question was, what was next for Zelda? With the development of new hardware meant tech demos were to be shown off. This is where our story begins. Space World 2000. Space World was a video game trade show hosted by Nintendo, similar to what we know as E3, and was a place for Nintendo and any of its licensees to show off new hardware and new titles. During the show, a compilation trailer was showing what featured a slurry of new titles for the GameCube, as well as not one, but two famous tech demos. Mario 128, and of course, Zelda. Obviously, what was only intended to be a tech demo gave fans an inside look at what could be the next Zelda game. With gritty and realistic 3D visuals, fans were buzzing with excitement, thinking that this was in store for the series next. Boy, were we wrong. Fast forward to Space World 2001, only less than a year later, with a demo of an actual forthcoming Zelda game. What happened? Fans were torn on the reveal. Why would they go in a cel-shaded direction? Series developer Eiji Aonuma stated that he hated the demo and found it too derivative of older Zelda titles, especially having exhausted this particular format. Zelda team explored other formats and eventually settled on a bright and cartoony look that would go on to divide the audience, even to this day now. Personally, I like it. I think there's nothing wrong with wanting to change things up, especially with a celebrated franchise such as Zelda. I mean, you can't continue to push boundaries if all you do is stay in the same box for a number of years. So for a game like Wind Waker to come in and totally fix things up and change things up graphically, especially, is one of the reasons why I find Wind Waker so compelling and interesting. Fast forwarding now to E3 of 2002, a playable demo for a new Zelda game was shown and eventually would win Best Console Game of E3, with some critics praising the game's new art direction still feeling very much like a Zelda game. Regardless of this though, Wind Waker still continued to divide audiences, again, something still happening today. Eventually released on December 2nd, 2002 in Japan, March of 2003 in the US, and May of 2003 in Europe, Wind Waker was incredibly well received by gaming press outlets such as Game Informer, Nintendo World Report, and CVG, giving it 10 out of 10s, and hitting the illustrious 40 out of 40 from Famitsu in Japan, and only just missing the mark from IGN, coming in at a 9.6. Probably too much water. So with all of the great reviews and high praise, what is the game actually about? What makes it so great? The Legend of Zelda Wind Waker is about a young boy named Link who lives on Outset Island with his sister and grandmother. Outset Island is a small, quaint little island with not much happening until one day a giant bird drops a mysterious young girl at the top of the island. After rescuing this damsel in distress, Link's sister ends up being kidnapped and held hostage at the Forsaken Fortress. It's up to Link to tag along with Tetra and rescue not just his sister, but a few other girls as well that are being held at the fortress. Unfortunately, Link's attempt is unsuccessful, and after being thrown from the fortress, Link washes up on the shore of Windfall Island, being seemingly rescued by a talking boat. Now this is where the game gets good in my opinion. There have been guides in Zelda games before, most notably the lovable but overbearing Navi from Ocarina of Time. But the ship, which is known as the King of the Red Lions, explains the events unfolding, and thus now does Link's quest truly start. I really love the connection you end up having with the ship.
right away you start to ask questions as, what is this boat? Why did it rescue me? What does it know that I don't? And more importantly, how does this thing talk?
Before we continue on with the story of the game, I want to take a deep dive into the actual setting of the game, the ocean. The ocean was believed to be a unique setting considering the visual style of the game, with the player sailing across a vast sea, finding islands along the way to help unfold the story. Obviously, the sea is a really cool place to put a Zelda game. I think it ties in really well with the cel-shaded nature, of course visually, but I always felt that Nintendo kind of cheapened out and did a expansive sea in favor of doing a large world map similar to what we know with Breath of the Wild. Not that there's anything wrong with that, and I'm probably wrong assuming that. But that being said, if I was to do any of the sailing that Link does in this game, my gosh, I would be so seasick.
In sailing the wide open sea in Wind Waker, you have to explore the islands in a linear nature if you want to progress the game in the way that it's intended. Within the first few hours of the game, you'll soon understand why the Wind Waker is actually titled as such. Similar to Ocarina of Time, having a musical instrument be the centerpiece of the story, Wind Waker's story is aided by the inclusion of a conductor's wand or baton that Link can use not just to control the direction of the wind, but to fast travel and take control of allies as well as inanimate objects to help solve puzzles and complete dungeons. The immediate goal for Link is to defeat the evil Ganondorf, who is back yet again for more trouble. The key to his defeat is by obtaining the 3 goddess pearls, place them in their respective statues at the Tower of the Gods, and access the Master Sword. This, to me, is where Wind Waker really gets good. After defeating the Guardian of the Tower of the Gods, Link is able to go below the ocean to a strange castle, seemingly frozen in time. Working your way through the castle, you come to a basement area where a sword is housed. The enemies that were once frozen in time are now alive, ripe for the picking with the now unsheathed Master Sword. The inclusion of a castle being underwater sealed the deal for me, with this game not only being good but great. Having an element like this almost adds an extra emotional investment in the story, knowing that there's a place frozen in time underwater and it's really up to you to restore the balance. Also, you can joke about Hyrule Castle having installed windows, but I'm not going to do that. The caveat here is that pulling the Master Sword also released the seal on Ganon's magic, which we learn once we confront him at the Forsaken Fortress with our newly acquired blade. During this confrontation, Tetra's true identity is shown to be Zelda, as the Triforce of Power which Ganon holds resonates in close contact with Tetra, recognizing that her necklace is actually the Triforce of Wisdom. From here, sailing back to the castle under the sea is where we really learn what's happening. We're in Hyrule, and how did it get covered in water? Well, let's quickly talk about the fact that there's a thing called the Zelda Timeline. The timeline is just that, a representation of which game takes place in what order. Wind Waker takes place in the events after Ocarina of Time, where the goddesses flooded Hyrule to prevent Ganon's return. Every Zelda game so far except Skyward Sword takes place after a game in its own respective timeline, depending on different outcomes of the story that precedes it. For example, A Link to the Past takes place after the hero of time is defeated at the end of the game. Majora's Mask takes place in the childhood timeline where the hero succeeds, and Wind Waker takes place in the adult timeline after Ganon is sealed away. So from here, Link has to find the last piece of the Triforce, which funnily enough is broken into pieces and scattered around the sea and the islands within it, to then truly have the power to take down Ganon. Upon the final battle, Ganon has a strange aura around him. To me, it almost felt like Ganon was the most grounded in reality bad guy in the Zelda series. Not so power-hungry like the other iterations of Ganon, but more reflective and downtrodden. In my opinion, I think he had accepted his defeat long before the battle began, but still gave it his all anyway. And with one final blow, probably the most gruesome actually in the Zelda series, history is made again, thanks to the hero of time. Wind Waker is a beautiful water-covered world, but what about the people that inhabit it? Now, I won't mention every single character, but rather some characters that stuck out as more memorable in my playthroughs of the game. The Red Lion, the guiding ship through most of the game. His true character is revealed towards the end of the game as the actual king of Hyrule, unfortunately washing himself away to thematically cleanse the present from the scars of the past. Link's grandma, the motherly character of the game, one that I feel no other iteration of Link had, therefore you have an immediate emotional connection to her. She'll make you an incredible soup that will not only heal you once, but twice. Don't sleep on this. This is great. Makar, the Korok maestro who has a part to play as eventually becoming the Wind Sage. I thought he was quite cute, funny, and quirky. And during my Twitch streams of this game, his name gave me a great setup of, dude,
where's my car?
Where's Makar?
Where's your car, dude?
And lastly, Tingle. Tingle is probably the most famous character from this game, having been a recurring role from other Zelda games, starting with Majora's Mask. His main role here is to decipher maps, which you'll need in your search for the missing pieces of the Triforce. He's a very strange character, and you actually meet him in a jail cell. Doesn't really give a good first impression. Largely controlling and feeling like the games before it, Wind Waker is a third-person open-world action game with some magic role-playing dust scattered on top. Featuring your sword and shield, plus all the other items you get along the way, such as arrows, boots, grappling hook, and boomerang, among others, Wind Waker had a lot of choice for how to take down enemies. And yeah, you can even take your enemies' weapons. That's pretty cool. For the first time in a Zelda game, we had full control of the camera. What a treat! Going back and playing Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask is almost cumbersome now due to the modern controls in games today. And Wind Waker was the first to move to this new camera control scheme. It was a massive quality of life improvement, in my opinion. You'll find that the world is set out in a giant grid-like square, and if you're looking at walkthroughs online, each quadrant will be assigned a letter and a number. This makes the act of sailing with a purpose all the more easy, and especially more so knowing where to fast travel once you unlock that feature. Within each grid are different islands, some essential to continuing the story, and some non-essential for various treasures that will help you in your travels, or health upgrades if you want to do like 100% completion. In typical Zelda fashion, the story elements are held within dungeons and boss battles. Within each dungeon, you'll find a new item that usually becomes the new gimmick, for lack of a better word. Aside from boss battles, you'll have puzzles ranging from easy to how the heck do I do this without the internet? Sailing is a breeze and easily controlled by either letting the wind in your sail or slowing down to treasure hunt, an important part of the game when finding the missing pieces of the Triforce. Although optional, mostly, and again, needed for the extra boost or a 100% playthrough. The combat is fun, challenging, and rewarding. Different weapons are useful in different situations, and you do have the option to parry while targeting an enemy before they are about to attack, therefore canceling theirs and giving you a one-up on them as a result. Most of the boss battles are tackled with one item, again, usually the one you find in the respective dungeons. For example, Dragon Roost Island requires the grappling hook thrown at the dragon's tail hanging down from the ceiling, or the Earth Temple's boss requiring you to reflect the light onto it with your newly acquired mirror shield. This level of variety makes each boss battle unique by how you're supposed to approach them, though it's usually the classic 3 hits and it's dead thing that Nintendo is known for. The Zelda series has also been known for its music, whether it's a catchy, uplifting, or downtrodden and melancholy. This game is one of the prime examples, almost even a masterclass, for how music can give what it's attached to long-lasting character. Longtime composer Koji Kondo, acting as a sound director, was joined by a team of 3 composers to come up with a unique take on Zelda's soundtrack with an Irish and Celtic feel, but while still incorporating some of Kondo's older songs in the process. I think it really shows the approachability of Zelda. Tackling a new game with a fresh look and a cool folky sound, it was a bold decision, but in my opinion, it really paid off. And if you want to hear a different take on a track from the game, check this out.
One thing I should mention, of course, doing a retrospective video of this nature, is that Wind Waker was eventually ported to the Wii U as Wind Waker HD. Now, obviously, my Wii U is a little bit dustier than it used to be, but the last time that I actually played this, as I mentioned before, was on Twitch, doing an entire playthrough of Wind Waker HD. It's a fantastic game, and at that time was a great way to make a GameCube game more accessible on the Wii U. but the Wii U isn't really accessible these days.
The differences between the two versions were more about quality of life improvements, such as being able to grab the swift sail, which changes the direction of the wind no matter what direction you sailed in. The Triforce charts being another great one, which was welcomed by the fans. In the GameCube version, when you searched for the Triforce pieces, you had to track down 7 charts as opposed to the now 4 in the HD version on the Wii U. It just helps streamline the overall experience towards the end of the game. Walking forward to climb is another one, which seems super obvious, but the press A to climb from the GameCube version seems a bit more cumbersome now in comparison. These handful of changes among the other ones might be enough to incentivize new players to get on board, though this game would benefit incredibly by coming to the Switch as a direct port from the Wii U with the HD version. That's a lot of letters there, but you get what I'm saying. I mentioned this towards the beginning part of the review, but Wind Waker was really a breath of fresh air at the time, and we can see now the long-lasting effects of that. For example, with the Smash Bros. Games that would follow would always include Toon Link, the colorful and quirky version of Link. The graphical styles of later titles such as Skyward Sword and Breath of the Wild I feel are easier to insert into the franchise thanks to Wind Waker. As a result, their overall visual style is more colorful and comic-like, as opposed to the more dull and possibly realistic approach with Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask.
So while I loved A Link to the Past and treasured Ocarina of Time, I think Wind Waker is the greatest game in the Zelda series, purely not just on substance, but how it propelled the series forward with new control schemes and visual aesthetics that are echoed today in modern games like Breath of the Wild and Skyward Sword. The games that preceded it may have laid the foundation, but I think Wind Waker totally reimagined the series formula in a way that only 20 years later we can truly start to appreciate.